The people closest to you are often the source of your deepest restrictions, and telling the truth about that feels like betrayal. Not the kind of betrayal that involves deception or broken promises, the kind that lives in your chest when you admit, even privately, even to yourself, that someone you love shaped you in ways that didn't serve you, that the person who was supposed to protect you didn't, or couldn't, or was too consumed by their own restrictions to notice yours. This isn't about blame. This isn't a grievance episode. This is about the relational architecture that was built around you before you had any say in the blueprints. And the fact that most people will go their entire lives without auditing it, because auditing it feels disloyal. Loyalty to a story that hurt you is still loyalty to a story that hurt you, even when the story involves people you love. The first memories of my biological father are etched in the sensory landscape of 594 Driggs Avenue in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Raphael Torres. His smile catching light through the windows, his laughter bouncing off narrow walls, warmth and presence in a small apartment that felt enormous when he was in it. Then came the void. He wanted to play piano like Mozart for the masses, and I was not part of his quest. That's not interpretation, that's what happened. He chose a dream over fatherhood. He chose the possibility of what he might become over the reality of what he already was, a father to a child who needed him. His absence didn't just remove a person from the apartment, it installed a relational template. Before I had language for it, before I had cognitive development to evaluate it, a pattern formed. People you depend on can leave. Connection is conditional. Presence is temporary. The person whose job it is to stay might not. That template didn't expire when I left 594 Driggs Avenue. It followed me into every friendship, every professional relationship, every collaboration, every partnership. The expectation, quiet, barely conscious, always running, that the person across from me would eventually choose something else over being here. My stepfather filled the physical space. He was present. But his love and attention were reserved for his biological son, my brother. Physically in the room, emotionally directed elsewhere. A different kind of absence, one that teaches you that proximity is not the same as connection. You can live with someone and still be relationally invisible. And then there was Teddy's Bar, an old bar in Williamsburg. My parents would frequent that bar and bring me along, leaving me to my own devices between ages 4 and 7. I'd watch the patrons, drunk, acting oddly, breaking into arguments over the pool table. I was there at least twice a week. I learned to steal quarters off the pool table when the adults were preoccupied in their madness, and I'd use those quarters to play arcade games in the back. I was there so often, I once reached level 99 on a single quarter on the game Dig Dug. That's where I learned to watch people, not from a textbook, from survival. Reading the room at Teddy's Bar before I could read words. 2 fathers, 1 absent, 1 present but directed elsewhere. Both installed the same lesson. Your presence in someone's life does not guarantee their presence in yours. 594 Driggs Avenue, pre-gentrified Williamsburg. Latino, Italian, and Hasidic cultures side by side with very little cross-pollination. This is where relational survival training happened. My first week in junior high school, as I was walking home, a kid, elementary school age, smaller than me, pulled a knife and told me to give him my hat and my wallet. I was about to fight him. He was a child. I could see myself winning this. He told me to look behind me, a mob of adults, armed and waiting. I gave a little kid my hat and my wallet because the architecture behind him was designed to guarantee I would. That's what Williamsburg taught me about relationships before I had any framework for processing it. The threat you see is never the whole threat. People are unpredictable. The person in front of you might be a front for something you can't handle, and vulnerability, standing there with nothing, humiliated by a child, is dangerous. Showing weakness invites exploitation. The rational response is to build a wall, control what people see, give them the version of you that doesn't get targeted. I built that wall. Not consciously, I was a kid, but the architecture was solid. Stern exterior, controlled presentation, refusal to let anyone see pain. These weren't personality traits, they were survival strategies. They kept me alive in a neighborhood where the alternative was measurably worse. The problem with survival strategies is they don't come with expiration dates. The wall I built at 10 to survive Williamsburg was the same wall I carried at 25 into romantic relationships, at 30 into professional teams, at 35 into my second marriage. The context changed, the strategy didn't. What I intended as strength, people saw as coldness. What I intended as self-sufficiency, people experienced as distance. What I intended as protection landed as aloofness. I was protecting people from seeing my pain. They were experiencing me as someone emotionally unreachable. Further into that first week, there was a girl. I was attracted to her. She was dating a ninth grader, huge kid, 2 years older, physically intimidating, and the way that matters when you're 13. And I was a hungry kid with holes in his sneakers, someone who painted his sneakers with markers, hoping people wouldn't see the holes. That girl's friend told me something. If I fought her boyfriend, she would go out with me. I didn't want to fight anyone, but somehow that rumor spread throughout the entire school. By the end of the day, everyone knew. I was fighting a ninth grader after school. I never agreed to it. It didn't matter. After the final bell, I found myself surrounded by a mob. They formed a circle. The ninth grader stood on one side. I stood on the other. Every time I tried to exit, they pushed me back in. The circle was the cage. Then the ninth grader put on brass knuckles. Within moments, I was getting pummeled. At some point, my head was being banged into the side of a parked car, over and over. And in that moment, survival mode. No options left. I bit a chunk out of his hand. I didn't know what else to do. The bully ran, but the mob forced me to chase him. We ended up at his house. His mother was outside. She saw her son's hand, bloody, and she looked at me and said one word, animal. My mother knew this woman, and every time they saw each other after that, every single time, she would tell my mother that I was an animal. That label, installed by an adult who saw a 13-year-old boy defending himself with the only tool he had left, followed me. The next day, that girl told me she was my girlfriend. By the end of the school day, she had broken up with me. I don't know if she orchestrated the whole thing to escape her boyfriend. All I know is what I learned. People will use you. People will manipulate situations you never agreed to. People will watch you get hurt and call it entertainment. And when you survive in the only way available to you, someone with authority will call you an animal for it. The relational template from my father said, people you can depend on can leave. The template from this moment added, people you're attracted to can destroy you, and they might do it for reasons you'll never understand. Add this layer, my body was also undermining relational trust from the inside. Osteoarthritis since age 7. Friends constantly tease me about getting injured again. Another limp, another grimace, another day while sitting out while everyone else played. The teasing was affectionate, but it didn't matter. What landed was your body makes you different. Your body makes you the subject of other people's commentary. Your body is public text that people read and respond to before you've said a word. I developed a pattern of constantly questioning myself. Why did people interpret me in ways that didn't match my truth? Were they seeing something I couldn't? I became hypervigilant about perception, monitoring how I was being received, trying to close the gap between how I experienced myself and how others seem to experience me. The result? I internalized everything, endlessly analyzed interactions, connection through ideas rather than vulnerability, self-sufficiency instead of interdependence, analyzing instead of feeling. The analytical pattern, the one that produced a book heavy on frameworks and assessment tools, the one that built the Synovial space methodology, didn't emerge from intellectual preference. It emerged from relational necessity. If I couldn't trust my body to behave predictably, and I couldn't count on consistent family connection, I could at least try to understand the systems. Perception felt safer than exposure. Eventually, I changed the first thing people perceived, my name. I used the legal benefits at the New York Public Library to change Raphael Torres to Raphael St. James. I wanted to Americanize my name, tired of watching faces shift when they saw Torres on a resume. St. James opened doors that Torres didn't. That's relational reality in America. I chose St. James because tradition holds that James was Jesus' brother, the one who lived in the shadows of someone divine. I liked underdog stories. The analysis, the name, the stage persona, all of it was protection, sophisticated perception management. It felt like safety. It was, until it wasn't. I got married at 18. I need to explain why, because it matters for the relational pattern. I was a virgin at 18, partly because I was dirt broke with clothing that looked the part. I was also devout. The Christianity in me at 11th grade I'd embrace said fornication was the path to hell. I had a girlfriend. She led me to the church that converted me to the Pentecostal faith. Born again. I was getting close to her in the way that youth naturally get close, but I didn't want to violate Jesus. I didn't want to sin, so I married her. Not because we were ready, not because we'd done the work of understanding ourselves or each other, because my religious programming said marriage was the only acceptable container for what I was feeling. I followed the programming. We were too young. We both had unaddressed traumas colliding in ways neither of us had tools to handle. By 19 or 20, I was divorced. After the divorce, my biological father reappeared. After years of absence, he said he wanted to get close to me. He wanted me to live with him in New Jersey. I told him I was about to move in with my new girlfriend. He said, bring her. Move in with us. He had come out as gay. I accepted that. I relished the opportunity to finally know him, to have him teach me guitar. I'd save for 6 months to buy an electric guitar, an amplifier, an acoustic electric. After the divorce, those instruments were how I healed. As soon as we moved in, he was never around. The same pattern from childhood, choosing something else over being present, playing out again. In the same body, with the same result. One day I came home from work. My guitars were gone, the amplifier, all of it. He had stolen them, sold them. When I confronted him over the phone, he was cold. He was demeaning. He tried to blame me, the man who abandoned me as a child, who I'd given a second chance, who I'd accepted fully. He stole the instruments I used to heal and then told me it was my fault. I moved to the Bronx with my girlfriend, bought her a puppy, tried to build something stable. She cheated on me. After that, I cycled through the only containers left, a friend's apartment where I overstayed my welcome, back to my mother's apartment at 594 Driggs Avenue, the origin point, where being inside those walls thrust me back into everything I'd been trying to escape. So I made a choice that sounds worse than it felt at the time. I decided to live in Central Park. By day, I went to work, I went to the gym, I dropped off whatever I needed at my mother's apartment, maintaining the appearance of normalcy. At night, I slept in the park. Nobody knew. This was the year 2000, right around the time I was gaining recognition in spoken word poetry at the Nuyorican. Working by day, standing on stages, transforming pain into performance, receiving applause by night, and then finding a bench or a bush in Central Park to sleep on. I wasn't homeless because I had no options. I had my mother's apartment. I chose the park because returning to my origin felt like regression. Sleeping outside in the open felt less suffocating than being inside the architecture of my past. Here's the relational lesson from that period. Every container I tried had failed. Marriage failed, father, theft and abandonment again, relationship, betrayal, and at some point I stopped looking for containers. I chose no container, open sky, no walls, no one to disappoint or be disappointed by. That's what relational collapse looks like when the person experiencing it is still functioning, still working, still performing normalcy. You can be homeless and employed. You can be isolated and celebrated. The exterior doesn't match the interior. The emotional pillar and the relational pillar collapsing at the same time while the professional pillar keeps running. I met Liz in 2005, 5 years after the park. 5 years of rebuilding and therapy that partially worked. She saw through it, not immediately, not completely, but steadily over the years, she learned to read the signals beneath the controlled exterior. She could tell when I was hurting, physically, emotionally, even when I said I was fine. She lived with enough of her own restrictions, East New York, 2-hour commutes, systemic barriers, career battles, to recognize a survival strategy when she saw one. The problem wasn't that Liz couldn't see me. The problem was that being seen, genuinely seen, by someone who wasn't leaving, required me to dismantle the thing I'd spent 30 years building, the wall. The wall that kept me alive in Williamsburg. The wall that kept me functional through chronic pain. The wall that made me look composed in boardrooms and composed on stage and composed while sleeping in Central Park. That wall in a marriage is a prison for both people. Because here's what nobody tells you about the controlled exterior. The person performing strength is exhausted, and the person watching the performance is lonely. You're both in the same room, and nobody's actually there. Chronic pain forced the issue. Osteoarthritis doesn't care about your relational strategy. When your hip locks mid-stride, when inflammation makes it impossible to get out of bed without help, the mask cracks. You can't perform self-sufficiency in moments of genuine dependence. Liz didn't fix me. That's not how this works. What she did was refuse to accept the performance. She stayed in the room when the mask slipped. She didn't punish the vulnerability. She didn't weaponize the weakness. She just stayed, even to her detriment at times. And that, someone staying while you're actually visible, not while you're performing visibility, rewrote something the original architects had installed. Not completely, not permanently. The pattern persists. The wall comes back. I notice it. I lower it. It comes back. I notice it again. That's the work. Years later, we moved the family to California, Carlsbad first, then Vista, 5 acres in North County, San Diego. I visited the schools and parks my children would attend and visit, heated pools, running fields, playgrounds with beautiful landscaping, butterflies flying through my youngest daughter's school grounds. And I cried, not from joy, from grief. I cried for all the children in New York City, compressed into neighborhoods with no outlets, no visual beauty, no space to imagine anything beyond the constraints. I cried because I hadn't seen many butterflies in my childhood. Punches flew more than butterflies. I thought I was finally giving my children something I never had. And then my stepdaughter, beautiful, strong, started getting bullied. They made fun of her hair, her skin color, the way she wore Jordans in a place where few kids wore Jordans, the same emotional violence I experienced as a child, just wearing different clothes, different geography, same relational destruction. I cried again, because despite the beautiful environment, despite everything I thought I was providing, my oldest was going through the same turmoil I did. The butterflies didn't protect her. The heated pools didn't insulate her from cruelty. And then she told me something that broke me open in a different way. She preferred her old school in Far Rockaway, New York City. Her friends, her school, the environment she'd known her entire life. The Mediterranean oasis that had moved me to tears didn't impress her. She wanted to go back, so we let her live with her family there. My experience was not her experience. My childhood was not her baseline. The thing I would have given anything for at her age, space, beauty, butterflies, wasn't what she needed. She needed her people, her context, her familiar architecture, even if that architecture had its own restrictions. The relational pillar isn't just about the architecture others built around you, it's also about the architecture you build around others and the humility required to recognize when your blueprints don't fit their lives. Everything I just told you about my biological father choosing his dream over fatherhood, about my stepfather's emotional direction, about the wall I built, about the marriage at 18, about sleeping in Central Park, about the mask with Liz, about the butterflies that didn't matter to my stepdaughter. None of it is comfortable to say publicly, not because it's untrue, because it's true about people I love, including myself. My father wasn't a villain. He was a man with his own restrictions, running his own unaudited relational code from his own childhood. His absence wasn't malice, it was his limitation expressing itself. Naming the impact of that absence feels like accusation. My stepfather provided a roof, food, and stability. He was present when the biological father wasn't. Naming the emotional direction of his attention feels ungrateful. My first wife and I were both too young, both carrying unaddressed trauma. Naming what happened feels like blaming someone who is just as lost as I was. This is why most people never audit their relational architecture. The audit requires saying something honest about people who tried, people who gave what they had, and saying the honest thing, what you gave me wasn't enough, and what I needed was unmet, and that shaped me, sounds like betrayal. It's not. Betrayal is lying about what happened to preserve a comfortable narrative, telling the truth about someone's impact on you while acknowledging they were running their own unaudited code. That is the only honest foundation a real relationship can build on. But it doesn't feel that way. It feels like disloyalty, and that feeling keeps people locked inside relational patterns they've never examined, defending blueprints they didn't design, repeating cycles they didn't choose. But your parents did their best. They did. Their best was informed by their own unaudited relational code. My father's absence wasn't born the day he left, it was born in whatever template his parents instilled in him. I can acknowledge that his choice shaped me and that he was navigating his own restriction. Both are true. The question is whether I'm willing to hold both without collapsing into either blame or excuse. But you turned out fine. Define fine. Built a career, wrote a book, married a woman who challenges me. By external metrics, yes. But fine doesn't mean that wall doesn't go back up every time vulnerability feels dangerous. Fine doesn't erase the fact that I was homeless at 23 while performing success on poetry stages. Outcomes are not evidence that the restriction wasn't real. Outcomes are evidence that I built something despite the restriction. But bringing up old wounds doesn't help. It does if the wounds are still shaping your current relationships. If you've never traced back to the source, you're making present-day relational decisions based on past tense programming you haven't tested. That's not healing. That's avoidance. But forgiveness is the answer. Forgiveness requires honesty about what happened. You can't forgive what you've never named. Most people skip to forgiveness as a way to avoid the uncomfortable middle step, saying the true thing about the impact. Premature forgiveness is performance, the emotional pillar all over again. Genuine forgiveness comes after honest acknowledgement, not instead of it. This sounds like therapy, not coaching. Naming a relational pattern is not therapy. Treating a clinical condition is therapy. The relational pillar maps where restriction is operating so you can see it and make conscious choices about what you do next. Awareness isn't treatment, but treatment without awareness is blind. 8 billion people, every single one raised inside someone else's relational architecture. Nobody chose their family. Nobody designed the environment they grew up in. Nobody selected the relational templates that got installed before they had words for what was happening. And almost nobody goes back to audit it. Because auditing your relational architecture means looking honestly at the people who built it. And those people are usually the ones you love most close to you. They feel the most loyal to you. Your mother's communication patterns weren't born the day she used them on you. They were born in her mother's kitchen. Your father's emotional availability wasn't a personal choice made fresh each morning. It was inherited software. His father didn't model vulnerability either, or his father before that. The code has lineage. Almost nobody traces it. These patterns aren't personality, they're programming. And they're running in every relationship you're in right now, including the one you have with yourself. The relational template my father installed, that connection is conditional, that presence is temporary, produced something unexpected, a capacity for observing relational dynamics with unusual precision. When you grow up expecting people to leave, you watch people carefully. You study entrances and exits. You learn to read the subtle shifts in energy that signal withdrawal before withdrawal happens. You become, out of self-preservation, an analyst of human connection. That analytical capacity, born from relational pain, not academic interest, is the engine of the Synovial space methodology. The entire framework is built on the ability to see where people are stuck in relationships they haven't examined, performing connections they aren't experiencing, defending blueprints they didn't design. The collapsed containers, marriage at 18, betrayal, homelessness in Central Park, taught me what happens when every relational structure fails simultaneously. That knowledge shows up every time I coach someone whose life looks functional, but whose relational architecture is hollow underneath. I recognize it because I've slept in the park while performing normalcy. And my stepdaughter's preference for Far Rockaway, the discovery that my healing isn't her healing, taught me that even well-intentioned architecture can be wrong for the person you're building it for. That humility shows up every time a client describes the life they built for someone they love, and I ask whether the person they built it for would choose it. None of this is redemption narrative. I didn't need my father to leave to become who I am. I would have preferred a father who stayed. The point isn't that pain is good. The point is that pain, honestly engaged, produces capacity that comfort doesn't. I am not a therapist. I'm not a relationship counselor. If you're in a relationship that involves abuse, manipulation, or genuine danger, see someone qualified to help you address that. What I am, someone who carried relational architecture designed by people who were themselves carrying unaudited code. And I spent decades before I realized the blueprints weren't mine. Someone who got married at 18 because religious programming said it was the only acceptable container. Someone who slept in Central Park because every other container had failed. Someone whose stepdaughter taught him that his blueprints don't fit everyone's life. The relational pillar is the hardest pillar to be honest about because it implicates the people you love. It asks you to say the true thing, not the comfortable thing, not the loyal thing, and hold it alongside the equally true thing that those people were doing their best with what they had. Both truths can exist simultaneously. Holding both is the work. Collapsing into blame is easier. Collapsing into excuse is easier. Holding both where the real relational movement lives. Here's what I leave you with. Not advice, a question. Who designed the relational blueprint you're currently living inside? And have you ever tested whether it still fits or whether you've been loyal to architecture that stopped serving you a long time ago? One pillar of 8, your relational life. Who you let in, who you keep at distance, who you perform for, who sees the real thing. Relational restriction doesn't stay in your relationships. It shapes how you show up professionally because the wall you built at home travels to work. It distorts your emotional life because performing connection requires suppressing what you actually feel. It affects your sense of purpose because the deepest purpose often involves other people. And if your relational code is running interference, purpose stays abstract instead of lived. The book, Synovial Space, A Guide to Dynamic Living, maps all 8 dimensions and walks through the relational edge expansion framework. The free diagnostic at h2pcollective.com maps where you actually are across 8 life pillars. It takes about 15 minutes, honest data. The people closest to you are often the source of your deepest restrictions. That's not the end of the conversation. That's where the real conversation begins. This has been Pillar Work. I'm Raphael St. James.